How's it going, guys? I hope you guys had a great New Year's holiday. So Arknights is getting its 5th anniversary soon. I hope you guys somehow saw the one of the live streams because I didn't see either of them. I went through and checked the event date though, and they have announced that the event will be starting on the 16th of January, which is basically the day that Enfield beta starts, which is very good news for me. And as per usual, I want to get my Shiju pool video out before the banner starts. So here we are recording this video. I struggled quite a bit about thinking about like the recommendation of Shiju pool on this banner. And I went through and did a lot of research, and I used my CN account to do a bit of testing on both of them again as well. And I've came up with the conclusion. So this time around, there will be no straightforward like, oh, should you pull this banner or should you not? Outside of the thing of, oh, obviously because it's limited banner, so everyone's gonna pull. Outside of that, it's about like the characters and how they usually perform and how easy they are to use in your day-to-day content. So without further ado say, let's begin and talk about the operators. And our first operator would be Pepe. And as most of you would know, usually I would put the limited operator in this as the second operator that I would talk about, but this time around I kind of want to switch them around because Pepe is the one I feel like is a bit more simple to explain. So, and not gonna lie, I feel like most people are just gonna pull Pepe anyway because she's so cute. But outside of her cuteness and Mystic Light Quest, because I know that that's probably the biggest reason why most of us will be wanting to pull her. Outside of that, let's talk about the operator as in terms of her kit and so on. So Pepe is a Earth Shaker, and I would not blame you if you did not remember this archetype at all, because I certainly mostly don't remember about the 5-star variant of this archetype. It's Oda, if I recall correctly. Yeah, no one really ever uses him in my opinion. I never used him. I didn't even raise him. So it is what it is. And the essential part of this operator is just that they are a high attack, low survivability. You can see how low her defense is here. And when they attack other than their main target, they will spread an AoE attack with 50% of the attack of the main attack. So you can kind of think of the Wizardel archetype, but guard. I think that's the easiest way to think about it. And as you can see, Pepe currently does not have a module in CN. So everything that I'm about to say is assuming that there will be a module coming soon and maybe fix some of her problems that I'm going to talk about. But that is just copium as of right now, because we don't know if there's going to be a module. So first of all, let's take a look at her talent. So Pepe's first talent is that whenever she defeats an enemy within her skill duration, she will gain 1 SP when the skill ends, up to 14 SP, or if you have potential 5, that can go up to 17 SP. And I think this potential is really worthless because in most stages you will not have 17 enemies to kill within her skill duration for her to kill during her skill duration. And not to say that I don't think she has the capability to steal that many kills from other operators to begin with, because of how low her damage is in general, her low basically DPS in general. So when you're using other operators like Lunar or Wizardel or Logos, those like high damage operators, she basically won't be getting that many kills, and I think it is kind of pointless for this talent. It's not that big of a impact. Her second talent is that when she's on the field, all god operators will have plus 16% attack, and at pot 3 this goes up to 20%. So the good thing about this talent is that this is the talent where I think the module will most likely update, where it will be like, oh, she doesn't need to be on the field, she just needs to be in your team. That's probably the most likely path that they're going to take, looking at all past operators. if they could buff the first talent or make it like I don't know, just buff it in somewhere where you get more SP more consistently. It doesn't need to be during the skill duration. That would be way better, but we'll see how that goes. So as you can see, her talents doesn't really affect her that much. The base attack increase might seem really good, but because of the way her skill scales, it doesn't really buff her as much. So that being said, let's take a look at her skills. So her first skill is a AFK skill where it can charge automatically and automatically trigger itself. You can charge it up to 2 times at M1 onwards, and at M3 this skill will only cost 5 SP. So the special thing about this skill is that when she is debuffed, so like if she's frozen, if she's stunned, if she's something like that, any debuff that can be resisted, then she can cancel that debuff immediately and attack an enemy. So the condition is that there must be an enemy within her skill area. As you can see, with just 1 tile in front of her, there must be an enemy for her to attack, so she can use this skill and then the debuff will be removed. So obviously that is the first downside of this skill, is you gotta know like where the enemies will be coming the moment she's frozen. Like let's say if you're killing like those ice exploding spiders, right? And then they explode because they're dead, and then she's frozen, right? What if the next enemy doesn't go in front of her, instead of go to the other lane? Then immediately she would just sit there and do nothing. So that's the first downside. Second of all, you can see how short her range is. So she can't even hit enemies that are far away. So if it is a range enemy that's attacking her when she's frozen, they just keep poking at her and there's nothing she can do about it. All sorts of problems with this skill. And in general, I wouldn't recommend anyone to M3 this skill. This is just your typical AFK skill with nothing too special about it. And the whole removing debuff thing, we've seen it on other operators. Have we ever seen have we ever seen any use out of those operators like visual? Mostly not. Now let's take a look at her skill 2. During her skill 2 duration, her attack area will increase. Think of Gavial Alter skill 2, the same attack area. Her attack will increase by up to 90%. Her attack will increase by up to 80%, and she will randomly attack enemies within her attack range. This is the biggest downside in my opinion about her skill 2. Now, every time you use the skill after that will give her an additional plus 40 attack speed. This can go up to 2 stacks, and at M3 this skill will cost 25 SP and will last 18 seconds. So first of all, let's take a look at this skill compared to Gavial's Alter skill 2. Gavial Alter is a 40-second skill duration with a 35-second cooldown. So this skill coverage is longer than the cooldown. With Pepe's skill 2, 18 seconds of duration with 25 seconds of cooldown. So the cooldown is way longer than the skill duration. First of all, that's the first thing. Second thing, yes, they both have stun. Wait, she doesn't have stun actually. No, she doesn't even have stun. Oh my god. It's Gavial that has the pool that can control the enemies, so she can help control the enemy so that they can't attack her in some instances. Third of all, because Pepe can only hit 1 target at once, while Gavial can hit 3 at once, even though Pepe has true AoE, but because the whole splash damage is actually just 50% of her attack, it doesn't really work that well unless the enemy has like really low defense, but that is becoming rarer nowadays. If you're a beginner, maybe that's different, because the first 6 chapters or so, the enemies generally have really low defense, but nowadays enemies have like way higher stats, and that extra 50% just doesn't work as well. Now, the third of all is that random attack target. The random attack nature kind of means that if there's an enemy literally being blocked by Pepe, even though she only has 2 blocks, right? Literally being blocked by Pepe, she will, and attacking her at the same time, she will attack she can attack any other target within her attack area and just ignore the enemy that's killing her. And because she's so squishy herself, that also means that there's a high likelihood that she would just be killed with those enemies. This is the whole design is just doesn't make sense to me, and it really feels like the biggest downside of this skill in my opinion. Obviously there are some circumstances where this skill is good, like if there's like multiple enemies and you hit them once at a time and they all take splash damage, so they will all mostly die at the same time. That sounds like really optimistic, but yes, there are situations like that, but most of the time this skill is not that good of a skill in my opinion. Now at last, let's take a look at her third skill, which is the demonstrated skill during the live stream for the Japanese live stream. So during her skill 3 duration, her attack interval will increase by 0.2 seconds, which is actually not as big because her attack interval was already pretty long. And her attack will increase by up to 240%. Whenever her attack hits a target, they will be stunned by 0.8 seconds. If it's the main target, so the one that takes the most damage, that will be increased to 1.5 seconds. Now, every time she attacks the next hit, so not the current hit, the splash area will increase gradually from 1 tile radius to 2 tile radius after 4 stacks. So every stack will increase her radius and attack by 25%. So the attack and AoE radius will gradually increase by up to 2 tile in radius, so 4 tiles in diameter. So the downside again of this skill is her range. So even though technically speaking this skill seems like a really high damage skill against a single target, the thing about this skill is, first of all, if you want this skill to deal damage to an AoE, right, you must make sure that she is attacking the highest defense or the highest, like the tankiest enemy, like let's say the boss, right? She has to be attacking the boss, and then when she's dealing damage to the boss, well, at the same time she's also dealing AoE damage to all the surrounding mobs. That would be the most optimized way to use her skill 3. But first of all, most likely in that case you will be blocking the boss with her, which is not even viable, so you got to think of another way. So what about letting the boss walk in and then deploy a defender onto the boss and then tanking the boss that way? But then if you were going to do that, why don't you just use other operators that have longer reach, I don't know, like Wizardel or something like that, and then deal damage further away? So whenever you try to deal damage with her skill 3, you're mostly putting her at risk, and that is a huge amount of skill. It's a huge amount of damage, but it takes 40 seconds for her to dish out the entirety of her damage, which, like, the damage per second thing, like, figure is really important for one reason and one reason only, is because the faster you can kill the enemy, right, the less damage you take. That makes sense, right? Pepe is a squishy operator, so her goal is to try to kill the enemy her goal is to try to take less damage as possible, because she will die. But then her skill 3 is a long-term skill that takes 40 seconds to dish out all the damage. You see the contradiction there? So that is why I really feel like Pepe is such a hard operator to use, and I genuinely wouldn't recommend anyone to pull her unless you're like, okay, maybe the module makes her perfect. Perhaps that can happen, right? We don't know yet. It's just that as of right now, without module, I cannot recommend anyone to pull Pepe. And if there is such a situation where Pepe would be good in the future, maybe you can just get her from a Spark and then future limited banner, or you can just get her off banner and, well, not off banner, but you can just get her during this limited banner, because most likely you'll be pulling this banner anyway because it's limited banner, and you can get a lot of good operators from the Spark shop, like AF Alter and whatnot. So maybe you just get her on the way, but I wouldn't recommend you to raise her as your first priority unless you are a complete beginner and you have no one else to use, because she does deal true AoE damage, and as I said, in the early game, enemies do have lower defense. So let's talk about her usage. So first of all, in your normal day-to-day content, Pepe is, as I said, really hard to use, and you like, again, you want to know the stage pretty well to know like where the boss will be, and then put a tank on the boss so that she has the chance to deal damage with her skill 3, and then you have to put Pepe in the perfect position, all that stuff. So if you're willing to deal with those, you can use her. She's perfectly fine if you really want to use her, because she does have quality damage output. It's just that you need to do a bit of work. It's not as easy as, oh, I'll just plot down Wizardel and everything is solved. Or put down Minar, everything's solved. It's not as simple as that, but she is usable. Now, when it comes to IS, the field that I'm the most comfortable with, to be honest, Pepe is one of those operators that, sure, you can use her. She's actually, I would say, 4th to 5th guard, 6-star guard that you would want to grab after like Minar, Opianis, Hoderer, and she's probably around the same place as Silver Ash. So take that as you will. The thing about her is that she scales really well with attack speed and damage buffs, because with her skill 3, right, if you can get more attack speed, especially in IS when you get like plus 100 attack speed, she will basically just be doing huge AoE stuns throughout 40 seconds. And if you can just think about that, and then plus a lot of damage, that is actually really good. But that is after, you only grab her after you got all these good collectibles and you have scaled your run really well. And then, oh sure, then Pepe is probably a viable choice. But let's say if you were to be like, oh, she's my starter, you can use her, but she's not as good, if you understand, because she will fall off starting from the later floors. And if you haven't gotten all your good collectibles and make your run really well, then she's not going to scale as well in the later floors. And then I don't even want to talk about CC, because CC is already dead in my opinion. I don't even know when the next CC is coming. In SSS, I think I even then I really wouldn't use her. Like, we have way better operators that have manually triggered skills and AFK skills. You really wouldn't see a usage out of Pepe. And with RA, I think there are some situations where RA does work, because a lot of RA bosses does take stun. So if you want to use RA, if you can use her in RA for like huge AoE and then dealing with some of the bosses in RA. So that's a viable choice. Speaking of, that just remind me, with her skill 3, the boss needs to be stunnable to provide survivability for her. And how many bosses are there in Arknights nowadays that doesn't have stun resistance? Let's think about that. So that would be it for Pepe. I hope you guys have made up your mind on if you want to pull Pepe or not. And if you're just like, I just want to pull Pepe because she's cute, that is totally justified, and I wouldn't blame you for thinking that, because that's the biggest reason I'm pulling Pepe as well, to be honest. And that would be it for Pepe. And let's talk about our second operator, Narantuya. And Narantuya is another new archetype sniper. So the 4-star archetype of this archetype, would be Caper. So again, I understand that a lot of you might not know this archetype that well, so let me explain for a little bit. So the thing about Loop Shooter is that they will shoot out a boomerang, basically. So they will shoot out and hit an enemy and then come back. They cannot perform another attack until the projectile returns to their hand. And first of all, that means that when the enemy is extremely close to them, like as you can see, she can even hit behind her. But if the enemy is one tile, just like right next to them, their attack speed will be once per second, which is really nice. And you can actually scale pretty well with attack speed buff as well. But the further the enemy gets, the worse they will scale with attack speed buff, which is a kind of a downside in my opinion. So now the archetype is well known. Let's talk about Narantuya herself, because she is kind of interesting as well, and her talent kind of works with this archetype pretty well in my opinion. So first of all, let's take a look at her first talent. So when she's on the field, whenever she attacks an enemy, she will steal 25 attack and 20 defense. At potential 5, this will be 27 attack and 21 defense. So the good thing about this is that because her base attack is pretty low, stealing this attack does increase her damage, so does allow her to bypass more defense. And then taking their defense also means that the enemies will have lower defense, so she can buff her own attack and then increase her own. It's so complicated. It's like having the ability to increase her attack by 480. I think that's the most easiest way to explain it. And the good thing about this is that even though she can only gain herself 10 stacks of like stolen attack and defense, but even attacking enemies after her stolen stats is maxed still decrease the enemy's stats. So it's not like, oh, she's stolen enough and then it doesn't decrease enemy stats anymore. It's not like that. She can still decrease enemy stats after her buff is maxed. So that is really nice and will actually greatly increase her attack and actually your ally's survivability as well, and so increase her own survivability, because as I said, the closer she is to an enemy, the higher her damage, and hence the higher the risk of her getting attacked as well. Now her second talent is that she will gain 35% of physical and arts dodge, and enemies within surrounding 8 tiles of her will have minus 20% physical and arts accuracy. So as I explained in a past video before, dodge and accuracy is a completely different way of calculation. So first of all, dodge is one of those situations where so first of all, the way you calculate it is you will first calculate a layer of dodge and then calculate a layer of enemy being accurate enough or not. So it's a multiplier, so you'll roughly get about 48% of enemy chance of missing when you apply both of them, and when you're at potential 3 when she gets 3% more dodge. And then the way this works is if the enemy has, let's say, several hits from one attack, right? If enemy has a skill that can hit like 5 times, the way dodge works is you will calculate dodge every single time. So 38%, 38%, 38%, 38% dodge. The thing with accuracy is that when the enemy initiates the attack, there's a 20% chance of all 5 attacks to be nullified, or all 20% of the attack to hit. So that's the way they differ. That's basically the easy way to understand it, I would say. So as you can see, both of these talents actually scale really well with the way that you would want to use her. So I think it's really well designed. Now let's take a look at her skills. So her skill 1 is one of those changing in status skills. So it's a kind of a permanent duration, like infinite duration skill, just like mountain skill 2. So when you change her into the skill form, her attack range will decrease by 1, and her projectile will deal damage equivalent to 190% of her attack as physical damage. Also, it will ricochet between enemies up to 3 times. Now, it will prioritize enemies that hasn't been hit before, and it will only ricochet to enemies that are only 1.7 tile radius of one another. So if there is only one enemy, that means you will hit that enemy that many times. Or if there's like 2 enemies only, you will hit target 1 and then hit target 2 and then go back to target 1. Something like that. So this is actually a really good AFK skill if you don't have any other AFK operators. I think this is one of those skills that scales pretty well, and you can easily hit enemies that are pretty far away if you ricochet and like let it like just ricochet away. So I think it's a pretty good skill, and the base damage is also really nice. You will gain a lot of debuff and buff onto enemies with this skill as well. So in general, you will increase your team's survivability. I think it's a pretty well designed skill. It's just that if you already have a lot of AFK operators built, I don't really see a point in building her just for that sake as well. But if you just started the game and you don't have that many AFK strategy operators, this is a good chance to get her and just, you know, M3 this skill, because at M3 this skill will only cost 5 SP, which is like really fast to activate. I think it's really nice for a beginner to have this kind of AFK capability, and if you're just starting this version. Now let's take a look at her skill 2. So skill 2, as you can see, I have M3 because this is one of those skills that you will want to use in IS. So skill 2 is a attack to recover SP skill, so that's kind of one of its big downsides in my opinion. So whenever you activate skill 2, within the 30-second duration, every time she attacks, she will deal up to 250% of her attack as physical damage and slow the enemy for 1 second. Now, when the projectile hits the target, it will charge forward for another 1 tile-ish and then come back. So the good thing about this is that when this happens, she will hit all the enemies behind it. And when the projectile comes back, it's like a boomerang. It will hit all the enemies on that path. So the good thing about skill 2 is it's a good AoE skill. So even though she's mostly a single target damage operator, skill 2 gives her some capability of AoE. This skill has the highest damage per hit out of all 3 of her skills. So that kind of gives her a bit of an advantage when it comes to this skill 2. And the good thing about this skill is also you can sometimes hit enemies that are just outside of her range, and you can also gather a bunch of enemies and then just deal with them all at once. So a situation that I would really use her is in IS5, where there will be like these maps that have like a ton of enemies that are just coming along one path. That's when she works really well. The thing about this skill is that because the way her damage is dealt, you kind of have to know how the enemy pathing is and then put her in the best position so that she can deal like a bunch of damage within one straight line, instead of like maybe going on a diagonal and you can hit enemies in only one lane. That's something that you don't want to do. So you kind of have to figure out the positioning for this skill. But if you know your map pretty well, like IS, then this is a really great skill to start off with, like starting with IS5. Now, let's take a look at her skill 3, because I think this is the main skill that everyone's most looking forward to. So skill 3, when skill 3 is activated, all of her attack will be shooting out 3 projectiles, each dealing 175% of her attack as physical damage. And when these projectiles all return, Narantuya will deal 160% of her attack as physical damage to at most 3 enemies in her surrounding 8 tiles, and slow them for 1 second. The thing about this skill is this is basically the next generation of Exia. Have I mentioned this? Have I said the same thing before recently? I think it was Ray. And I think this kind of shows Narantuya's problem is, you remember how Ray has kind of the same thing? Ooh, she scales really well, and when they're buffed, because both of them works really well with buff. Narantuya has dealing 75% of her attack as physical damage, but she doesn't have increased attack. So whenever you have other operators that can buff her attack, like let's say Wolf Aaron or Ark, you can easily let her get like way more damage in that way. And by the way, she can take Arc buff because of her first talent where she's stealing defense from enemies, so she can easily take the Arc's needles that way. But the thing about this skill is this is basically your next generation Exia skill 3 with higher base attack. So she can deal with enemies that have higher defense than Exia, and she also will have a higher total damage output than Exia, and she also does she also provides slow herself. So unlike Exia, you wouldn't need other operators to aid you with like slowing the enemies down. The downside is You gotta let the enemy be really close to you. You remember that? You remember that? Yeah, yeah. So let's say if you're in a really high difficulty fight, right? In IS as an example, you're like, I'm gonna gamble for that roughly 50% dodge chance. You dodge, you dodge, you dodge 3 times in a row, and the boss one-shots Narantuya. Your damage is gone. That is the downside of having to put the enemy so close to you. And the thing about this kind of skill is that sure, it wouldn't be that big of a deal, but let's take a step back and look at the actual use cases of these kind of operators. First of all, you're doing a ton of damage towards a single target. Rei does the same thing, right? The thing about Rei is that she is better at enemies that have higher defense, while Narantuya is better with enemies that have lower defense. But since it's a boss target, what's the chance of them having low defense? And it's not like Rei doesn't work any well. And the thing about Rei is also that she doesn't care how close the enemy is. You can just put her summon down and she will hit really far away, even further than Narantuya can. So she's also being placed at a safer position. With all that considered, yes, I will still recommend you to pull Narantuya because she's probably easier to use than Rei. But let's say if you're like a IS nerd like myself, and you're not, let's say you're forcing yourself not to grab Wizardo, then maybe, yeah, sure, you can start with Narantuya because that's probably the biggest reason I would recommend most people to pull her as well. But then she kind of conflicts with Rei, and from like 3rd, 4th, 4th floor onwards, because of how low her base attack is, she kind of struggles to deal with a lot of stages in IS5 onwards, from IS5. So that kind of makes her kind of useless in the later floors. So if you're really grabbing her just for the sake of grabbing her, you can, but she will kind of disappoint you if you don't have really good collectibles to buff her attack. So that's roughly it for Narantuya. I've gone through the day-to-day stages. You just skill 3 is pretty easy. IS, skill 2, skill 3. Oh, RA. With RA, sure, you can use skill 3 because you can give her a lot of buff with your food and whatnot. You can do a boss killer with her skill 3 if you really wanted to. With SSS, I think her skill 1 would work pretty well because you can just stack a bunch of attack on her, and then because her skill 1 only takes 5 seconds to trigger, you can just stack a bunch of attack on her and then just place her down 5 seconds, activate skill 1 and start AFK. So that's pretty good. Not quite so with her skill 2 and skill 3 because, yeah, single target doesn't really work as well. While skill 1 still has that, you know, kind of dealing with multiple target capability. So that would be roughly it with Narantuya. And I think in general, this is kind of a mid banner because sure, it kind of feels like, remember from roughly 2 years ago when we got Gavial Altar and Pozionka? That was a really good banner, right? And now we get Pepe, which kind of feels like a Gavial Altar, but kind of harder to use. And then we got Narantuya, which is kind of like Pozionka, but a bit different, but about the same because we already have someone overpowering them now when Pozionka didn't. So it kind of makes this banner really hard to recommend, and that's why really I struggled so hard to come up with a conclusion for this banner of should you pull or not. And in the end, I just gotta give you guys what I really think and my experience, and I'll have to let you decide on yourself because I will pull, but that's just because I'm a IS fan and I love to have so many operators that I can use in different situations. But this is your gacha resource, and we just been through so many good operators. I think a lot of us are really struggling with our pulls, and then we got really good banners coming down the road as well. So yeah, that's about it. So if you have made up your mind of if you want to pull this banner or not, please leave a comment down below and tell me what you guys think and why that is the case. And I'll see you guys in the next video where I will be pulling this banner and going for 300 pity because I recommended you guys not really to pull them. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.